Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the New England Fed today for our Humane Handling and Body Language session. We are really excited about our two presenters today. We have local New England people right here to share with us. So I would like to welcome Corinne Bourgoin, who is the Shelter Operations Coordinator for the MSPCA Boston Adoption Center. Corinne began her animal welfare career as a volunteer at the MSPCA, and a detour to Hawaii allowed her the opportunity to work with the Maui Humane Society in many capacities, including coordinating volunteers, foster parents, a high-volume spay-neuter clinic, and community cat programs. In her current position, she works with shy and feisty cats who need additional behavior resources, and she also focuses on reuniting lost cats with their owners. And on the dog side of things today, we have Morgan Katz, MSPCA CTP, Director of Behavior Services and Adoption Centers at the Adoption Centers for MSPCA Angel. She works in Boston, Centerville, Methuen, and Methuen, and she is involved in evaluating dogs that enter the adoption center, creating and carrying out daily enrichment, training, and behavior modification plans for the dogs, and providing behavior support and counseling for families before and after adoption. She and her team lead low-stress animal handling and dog training skill classes for staff and volunteers. Before we jump into the training today, I want to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors, MSPCA Angel, PetSmart Charities, and the ASPCA. Without them, we would not be able to offer these free trainings to our New England Fed members. So thanks to them for all of their support. And I also want to remind everyone of the other opportunities we have coming up this year. We have our leadership series in September, November, and February, where we will be bringing topics from our leadership event that we held in May to continue those conversations surrounding DEI and other important topics that our leadership summit focused on. So we'll dig a little bit deeper in each of the individual sessions in September, November, and February. And then we are also offering frontline webinars for staff. These are all really geared for either new staff or staff who have been around a while and maybe need a refresher. So today's humane handling session is happening in October. We'll be offering Can I Catch That? And followed by January's session with Can I Catch That Part 2. And those two sessions will be focusing on infectious disease and sanitation of our shelters. And then we'll be bringing some more frontline topics in March and May. So we have a really exciting year. And then, of course, you can stay tuned to everything we have to offer on our social media pages. You can find us on Facebook. You can follow us, as well as join a group where you can discuss all of these topics and more, and also put out requests for help from your other Fed organizations if you need to trade animals or share equipment or just build relationships so we can continue to being there for one another. We're sharing all of our favorite shelters programs on our Instagram, so you can tag us in all of your innovative posts and we'll share that out to share with the region. And you can also get our newsletter by signing up right on our website, newenglandfed.org, to keep up with all the activities we have going on. And last but not least, we are requesting speakers right now for our annual conference. We're really excited. It's going to be in person, finally, in the spring, and we look forward to seeing everyone again together and being able to get into a room together and hear all of the amazing people that we'll have lined up. And we want to hear from you. So if you have a great innovative program or you'd like to share something your organization is doing, please go ahead to our website and fill out that RFP, because we are looking for speakers to join us. So on that note, I will turn it right over to Morgan and Corinne, and we'll get going on our training. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Okay, it looks, I'm trying to share my screen, but it says that it's disabled. Host disabled participant sharing.
Let's take a look at that.
There we go. Okay. So we're going to talk about low stress handling today. And I'll start by saying that this is a really big topic that's not totally possible to cover in just an hour, especially when we're talking about multiple species. So we'll do the best that we can to do just sort of a Reader's Digest version today. But I would encourage everybody to check out Fear-Free Shelters. It's a sort of subset of the Fear-Free movement. They have programs for vet practices and individuals who care for animals in a variety of different settings. But there is a program that is specific for shelter workers. And if you are an employee or a volunteer with an animal welfare organization, then you get access to this programming for free. So it's really, really valuable information, and it's free. So it's a great resource. And I would encourage anybody who is just starting out in animal welfare, or if you've been doing this for 30 years, I think it's relevant for everybody, as the information is always changing, and we're keeping up to date with what is the best way to provide the best care for the animals that we work with. So you can visit that at fearfreeshelters.com to learn more. But today we're going to start with just a little bit of an overview. So when we think about what is low stress handling, it's sort of both a skill set, but really more than that, I think it's sort of just an overall approach to how we go about the day-to-day care for the animals in our organizations. It's talking about how we interact with them in a way that reduces their fear, anxiety, and stress, and ultimately creating an experience that is more enjoyable, less stressful, and ultimately safer, both for the animals and for the people who are involved in caring for them. And one of the most important pieces of how we implement this as sort of an overall application of our skill sets is how we're communicating with each other, how we're communicating with the animals in our care, by reading their body language and using appropriate body language on our end, and also how we're communicating with our teammates, whether they be other staff members, whether they be volunteers, anybody who is sharing the workload and caring for these animals. It's really important that we're communicating about what a particular animal does or doesn't like, or what a strategy that was particularly successful or that was not successful, and really being all on the same page about how we're supporting the animals that are in our care. So when we think about why is this important, why is it important to consider the stress level of the animals who we're caring for? One of the big reasons is their physiological response to stress. So animals who are experiencing significant or prolonged stress are more likely to develop a chronic health problem. Most commonly in the shelter, we see URI with dogs, both dogs and cats. And then it's sort of like a snowball effect. So they are more likely to become ill. Once they are ill, it makes it more difficult to treat them. Handling them can be more difficult because they're really stressed, which means that there's a higher likelihood of an aggressive response from that animal. It can make it less likely that we're consistently giving them the medication that they need if handling them is really difficult. And ultimately, it can prolong their illness. It can make it harder for them to get better, which ultimately prolongs their stay, increases the chance of other animals getting sick. So overall, it can be really difficult to keep a healthy population if that population is also really stressed. So some then obvious benefits to reducing stress for the animals in our care is that it just makes them overall more easy to handle. It makes it easier both physically to handle them, but also sort of emotionally for us as people who care about animals. We all got into this field because we want to help animals, we want to help people, and seeing animals who are in a lot of stress, or who are distressed, or who are sick, that is difficult for us to see. It sort of makes going to work a little bit harder if you know that you're going to see animals who are struggling every day. So doing what we can to reduce their stress, improve their well-being, and improve their health really also does a lot to improve the morale of the team, and to make us more efficient, and to make us just generally happier in our day-to-day. So again, this is fairly obvious, but if we think about why is it stressful for an animal to be in a shelter, it's important to think through sort of what is the experience of each individual animal. And this is something that we encourage our staff to talk through with adopters at the time of adoption, because it helps inform how they might support their animal through their transition into their new home. So if we're thinking about, for example, something that we see fairly often, a senior cat who has lived their whole life with one person. And their bubble was pretty small and they never really met other people or left their home environment. And then they end up in a shelter. So thinking about what that day looked like for that animal, they got put into a carrier that maybe they've never been in before, maybe by a person who was not their caretaker. And then they rode in a car maybe for the first time, and then they came into an animal shelter, and there's lots of other species. There's dogs barking, there's rabbits, there's birds, there's all of these other animals that they maybe have never been exposed to before. And then they get a physical exam by a stranger, they're being handled, they're on a table, then they get put into a cage that is essentially just like a metal box that, again, is really different than anything that they've ever experienced before. So, and then they live in the shelter for however long that we have them. So thinking about that experience for every animal that we encounter, I think really informs how we are going to interact with them. It can be easy to get caught up in the stress of the day-to-day. We're really busy. We have a lot of things to do. We have so many animals that we have to get through on their exams or whatever the case is. But if we're thinking about their individual experience, that can help us take a breath, slow down, and really do what we can in that moment to address that animal's needs, both physically and emotionally, and really do what we can to reduce the stress of what that interaction is gonna look like. And then thinking about other things that we do that are really stressful. We're invasive, we're doing procedures, we're doing assessments, we're going into their kennel space and removing them or cleaning and doing a lot of things that are stressful for them. And potentially that animal has arrived in our care already in pain or some amount of distress. So taking all of that into consideration is really important, with a goal in mind of how do we reduce stress and make that animal more comfortable throughout every interaction. And one of the really important ways that we do that is to all be on the same team. So it is not possible to have this as sort of a way that just sort of the normal way that we interact with animals if everybody is not on board. So it's important that as a team, you and your other coworkers or whoever else is on your team are making a commitment to how we're interacting with animals in a way that reduces their stress, and that we're doing that throughout every interaction. So it's harder to do when we are really busy. It's harder to do when we're really stressed. But those are the times where it's the most important that we're adhering to this commitment to reduce stress, and that we're doing so in a way that is competent. So practicing the skills, learning from people who have more or different experience, and really leaning on each other so that we can build up a skill set for everybody on the team. Thinking about every interaction, we want to consider how the pet perceives their environment. So we talked about what is their experience, but beyond that, we want to think about what is their experience, how are they perceiving everything around them. So can we use visual barriers to make it less stressful? Can we control the smell? So changing out, the exam table covering between cats and dogs, so that they're not smelling each other. Sound, thinking about what you can control the volume of your voice. Whether you close a cabinet quietly or slam it shut, and touch, how we're restraining animals, or if we're restraining animals, those sort of things. We want to be thinking about all of the strategies that might be relevant in this situation. So there's really not a one size fits all. We have to be observant of what the animal is telling us in that moment and adjusting accordingly. We're being flexible in our approach. We're committing to using these techniques in every interaction, identifying when we should stop, which is really considering if it's a want versus a need. So that's something that the fear-free literature talks about a lot of, do I really need to do this in this moment? Or is it okay if we hold off and try it later? Sometimes it is a need. Most of the time it's a want. So how can we assess that and then plan accordingly? And then again, engaging and initiating these conversations with your team members to share your experiences to set them up to be successful and ultimately to set the animal up to be successful. This I'm not going to go through. I just wanted to leave it up here as another reference for anybody who's looking for more information about low stress handling. Another really great resource is Dr. Sophia Yin. She did a lot of really excellent work in this field. And there's she has textbooks and videos and all sorts of material. So if you're looking for more, a quick Google search will bring up a lot of good stuff by her. Okay, so I'm going to switch over. Corinne's going to share her screen, and we're going to talk about cats. Awesome.
Hi folks, this is Corinne. So like Morgan said, this is definitely a scratching the surface of body language and low stress handling techniques. So I'm going to go through the cat portion. So in the interest of time, let's get started. So I'm just going to show you some slides and talk about cat body language and what we're looking at here. So on the stress side of this, I'm seeing cats with flat ears, or rear facing ears. They're in a kind of hunched, hiding sort of position. We're going to see dilated pupils, a tense body and face, and the cat kind of trying to like reduce their body mass, you know, sort of curling up to be as small as possible, sort of thinking that if maybe you won't see them. But on the relaxed side, I'm seeing these cats with a real lack of tension in their faces, what I would call kind of soft eyes on these top two, a relaxed eye. Their legs and feet are kind of splayed out. And of course, this cat on the bottom here is really kind of the ultimate relaxed cat with this elongated body position. In this slide, you know, we're reinforcing the things we looked at already. I did want to specifically highlight the tail positions on this because I think this is a useful chart. So for the friendly cat, we're going to see a high tail, often straight up with a little hook at the end. This cat wants to interact with you and is looking for attention. Next along here is the relaxed cat, and that is a tail that's kind of just a continuation of the spine. And this tail might slowly wave back and forth. Next, we've got a submissive cat, and this is a low tucked tail, but it's just kind of in a soft C shape. This cat's kind of unsure about its surroundings or what it's about to interact with. It's sussing the situation out. Next, we've got this defensive cat. So this has a soft downward curve. It could be a little bit puffed up. And this cat could either be preparing to retreat or move forward depending on the response to its stimuli or situation that it's in. A fearful cat has got that really hard curved C. That tail is tucked under, and it's probably trying to move away from the thing that's causing them fear. Next, we've got this agitated cat. This tail is, again, kind of straight along the spine, but it's going to be moving moderately to rapidly in what I call a very scientific thwapping motion, almost like a whip. It's moving along and the end is flicking, and this cat is annoyed and it's letting you know it. So this cat, I would be looking at what is in its environment, how are we interacting with it, and why is it getting so agitated. And then here we've got the kind of classic Halloween cat. This puffed up tail kind of looks like a raccoon. This cat might be hissing or spitting and maybe have its ears pinned, kind of like section 2 or 3 here with the faces above. So observation is really important about body language. So we want to look at what we're seeing and interpret that behavior. So these are cats in cages. You know, we all have to clean cat cages, interact with cats in cages on a daily basis. So it's really important to know what we're looking at. So we want to observe the cats as we approach, because their body language is their way of communicating with you. Are they relaxed? Are they approaching the front of the kennel with a loose body? Are their eyes dilated? Are they retreating and hiding in fear? So just quickly, these I'm going to start at the top left and go clockwise. This cat is very clearly comfortable and is resting near the front of their cage with their arms sticking out. This cat here is, you know, up at the front, rubbing on the bars, really asking to be interacted with. These two cats here are displaying a little bit different behavior. The cat on the right is retreating, kind of ducking its head and eyes to avoid an interaction. The one on the left is moving forward and a little more observant, but does have dilated pupils and some tension in its face. So it's less stressed than its neighbor, but it's still a little bit nervous and observant. This orange cat here, while he is at the front of his cage, he's got some pretty wide eyes with big pupils and some tension in his face. So he is forward and interested in what's going on, but this is a cat I would still approach pretty slowly. In the middle here, we've got this cat who's making himself as small as possible. He's tucked into a corner and he's furrowing his brow. He's really trying to avoid this interaction. And of course, this cat on the left here is retreating with her body, but showing her full teeth, hissing and spitting. This is a cat that I'm going to give some cool off time and not try to interact with her while she's in this really stressed state. So it's really important that we have a way of charting behaviors and observations so that staff and volunteers can really see the progress of the animal and adjust their plan as needed. So if your shelter or group doesn't already have a way of, at a glance tracking observations, I would make that a priority. And tracking behavior really helps cats get the interactions they need to, like Morgan was saying, to help them move forward in the process more quickly. So they have a shorter length of stay, they're less likely to acquire disease, then we don't go down the road of them needing treatment, increasing their stress, reducing their handleability. And just some things, we want to observe and record the body language as well as some of the behaviors that I've outlined over here. So, your group might be in a position where we're taking cats in as owner surrenders or strays. And so we really want to talk about this low stress, fear-free handling from the very beginning. So one thing to note, this happens to us often, we have people come in with cats just in their arms. So the very first thing we want to do is to make sure that the cat is in some kind of secure carrier. So if that means you need to get the person to a space and get that cat in a carrier, that would be my first thing to focus on. You want to keep that cat away from other animals. You're going to want to cover that carrier, that trap with a towel, and really move to a quiet space to have whatever conversations you need to have with the person bringing the cat in. When you move the cat into the intake space, you're going to want to think about the next things before you remove the cat from the carrier. So we want to make sure that if there are any other animals in that space that are going to become agitated or disruptive, we want to cover their cage, provide some sort of visual and or audio barrier, so as not to stress out both the animal that we're bringing in and the animal that we're working with. We want to make sure to use a non-slip surface on the exam table or where we're going to take the cat out and observe it, so they can feel more stable and comfortable. And then you also want to look, again, all before you take the cat out, you want to look around your space with the mindset of a cat who's nervous and worst case scenario could escape from your handling. So you want to limit access to out of reach spaces, close doors and cabinets, and have all the supplies you need ready to go. And also have your cage space already set up with litter, food, water, bedding, and a hiding place so the cat can immediately move to that space with no delay. And this is an example of some ways that we would suggest setting up a cat space so that they have a place to hide, and you could achieve that with a towel, a curtain, this transition box here, or even you don't have to get fancy, just a cardboard box. They should have a place to relax, and ideally their food and water is kept as far away as possible from each other within the confines of the space that you have available. So just to highlight again some things that Morgan already talked about, is this a want or is this a need? Can we wait, if the cat is really stressed out, if it's fractious, if it seems like it's not going to go well, can we wait? Is the cat intact? Can we do these things while they're under anesthesia for surgery? Can we give the cat some time and space to settle in? Could we use a chemical restraint if possible? And then even if you're in the midst of the handling and it seems like it's going downward, we want to be really careful and use as little restraint as possible. So if we're doing even just a few seconds of struggling, if the cat gets away from you, if we get to the point where the cat is scratching or biting, which hopefully we don't even get to that point, that's where it's really important that you have that safe space in the cage already set up. So you can say, okay, we're done here today for the time being. We're going to move this cat into a safe space and reassess. Another thing that we didn't specifically call out here is that, you know, sometimes we'll have a cat come in and based on our observations and our attempt to do any kind of handling, we decide that actually the least stress on everyone, specifically the animal as possible, is to set up their cage in a way that we can put the carrier in the cage with them, open the door. They have the space to come out and have access to the things that they need, but we don't even need to necessarily get them out of the carrier today or at this moment if that is the most least stress possible on the animal. So if we do have a cat that we're going to get out of a carrier, what are we going to do and what are we not going to do? So these slides here certainly demonstrate we're not going to pick the carrier up and dump the cat out. We're definitely going to make sure that whatever surface we are removing the cat onto, that again, we have that towel or that non-slip surface so the cat feels as secure as possible. You know, ideally the cat can come out on their own. You can encourage them to come out with food or treats. And another really great option is if the cat does not want to come out, you can actually, you know, work with your partner and as quietly and gently as possible, actually just remove the door and the cover of the top cover of the carrier and do any of the intake procedures that you need to do in the base of the carrier can be a really good low stress approach to cats that are coming in front loading carriers. If the cat is really friendly and easy to vaccinate, you can start them off as volunteer friendly, but if the cat is aggressive or scared on intake, you might want to keep them whatever your tracking system is as staff only for the first night. But we want to make sure going back to that tracking observations and behavior that we're reevaluating that on a daily basis so that the cat can be as volunteer friendly as possible so that they can get those interactions and move through the shelter system as quickly as possible, as safely as possible, and always keeping in mind that our safety and the animal safety is the top priority. We might also have cats that come in top loading carriers or cardboard carriers. And again, these are just a couple of do's and don'ts. So we don't want to, you know, we want to provide full support for the body of the cat while also being in control should the cat get nervous or wiggly. So we don't want to, like this first top left photo, be lifting them high in the air or only holding them by the scruff or only holding them kind of just with our hands in one really unsecure place. What we do want to do is provide support for the entire body by either holding them up against your abdomen, kind of like you see in this bottom right corner, or supporting their bottom while gently holding the scruff of the neck to support their head. So, you know, those are for cats that we feel like are pretty easily handleable and that we can take out of the carriers with, you know, just a tiny amount of restraint. What if we have a cat that is a little more recalcitrant to comply with what's going on? So we're going to use kind of some of the same principles that we used for the more friendly cats, but with a barrier in place. So one thing that they're not doing in these photos that I might recommend is also adding bite gloves to the situation. But also a towel is a really great barrier and is going to be your friend. So you can use the towel or blanket to sort of come in through the front opening of the carrier to cover the cat and provide a barrier with the towel. Or you can also do the same thing like we talked about by loosening the top and removing the top. You know, you don't need a lot of dexterity here, you know, especially if you're using the towel and bite gloves. You're kind of using the towel as a barrier and your arms as like, I kind of think of them as like tongs to apply gentle pressure to lift and move the cat once you have created that barrier between you and them with the towel. This is a way that we can cover the cat's face. That's going to, by covering their eyes, kind of reduce their stress and reduce the stimulus. And this is often a really great way to, again, gently low stress handle and remove from a carrier those cats that are being a little bit recalcitrant to come out and are more fractious. So then when we have to do our veterinary procedures, our preventatives and treatments, we always want to start with as little restraint as possible and adjust as necessary. So, I'm sure Morgan will talk a little bit about in her section about gradient touch and, approaching the animal in a way that doesn't startle them. So we're always going to want to put our hand on the side of the cat and keep a constant hand and pressure on the cat, moving our hands around while we stay in contact with the cat. So we don't want to take our hand off, move it back on into a different place and startle them. Take our hand off, move it back on into a different place and startle them. We start in a place that's comfortable for the cat, like on the side or the side of the neck. And then we can move our hands around, staying in contact with the body. That will keep them more relaxed. This little kitten over here on the side, this is a great reminder to all of us that like food can be a distraction and sometimes we might need little to no restraint. This black and white cat here in the middle, a cat who's friendly and comfortable might tolerate some veterinary handling with very little restraint when they're in an otherwise comfortable position like this cat. The calico, you can see the person is, again, using that gradient touch. They're keeping their hands securely on the cat as they move them into different positions to examine them. And then with the orange cat here, she's using her hand with the with the index and middle finger on the top of the head, and the thumb and on one side and the ring and pinky finger on the other side to maintain gentle control of the cat's head and neck area, while the arm supports along the back, while the other hand restrains for the back leg for a blood draw. So this, for a cat who will, tolerate this, is a really effective way to support the cat, use that gentle restraint just as much as you need, and provide the cat some low stress handling. So if those methods aren't working and you need to step it up a little bit, again, towels are a cat's best friend, but I also would say the handler's best friend as well. Again, step back for a second, talk to your team member. Is this something we need to do now? Could this wait? Could I use a chemical restraint? But if it's something you're going to move forward with, a towel is really your friend. So you can see with this cat in the green towel, you can kind of use like a burrito roll to restrict the movement of the cat's front legs and head, using the arms and abdomen to apply gentle pressure along the body to keep the cat still. We're using something similar here with the cat in the purple towel. If we go down to the cat in the blue towel, here they're kind of using the towel as a modified cone or e-collar to restrict the cat's ability to turn its head around. So if it's a procedure that you need to do in the back, quarter, third of the cat's body, this can be an effective way to restrain them gently and prevent them from biting or using their front legs to scratch you. If it's possible or necessary, you can also use the towel to cover most of the cat's body, including the head. Again, covering the eyes, covering the ears. We're going to reduce the stimulus and the stress a little bit. And then we're just covering the rest of the body, again, using our own body to apply that gentle pressure. And we can just pull out the body part that we need to access for the treatment or procedure. Just a quick thing about interacting with cats, overall, we want to make sure, again, we're observing and recording the cat's body language and behavior before, during, and after our interactions. We want to let the cat come to us and make this a friendly and positive interaction. We want to avoid overstimulation. So a cat who's exhibiting signs of overstimulation, that agitated thwapping tail, pinned ears, things we would want to avoid is like petting their full body, which can contribute to overstimulation. We want to avoid the mistaken identity of our hands and arms as toys. So for a cat like this, you could redirect that pent-up energy to toys and reinforce that time with people that they have right now is for gentle petting and interactions. Oh, there's our friend Jackson Galaxy. And these are just a few examples of things you can easily do and have volunteers or kids groups do in a shelter environment to provide enrichment and mental and physical stimulation for their cats. And most of them are made with common household items that would usually go out for the recycling or trash, using toilet paper or paper towel tubes, empty plastic bottles, things like that, to create little treat puzzles, treat pouches, and using toys to help them reduce their stress. So that is all of the cat section I have. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Awesome. Thank you, Corinne. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so now we'll move into dogs. So again, we're going to start with talking about body language. So when we think about body language, we're looking at a lot of the very similar things that we look at when we're thinking about cats. So when I'm sort of scanning a dog, initially I'm looking at their position in their kennel, their head position, their eyes, ears, mouth, and tail, and then their overall posture. So as you get more practiced in reading body language, you can sort of take a snapshot of all of these things all at the same time. But as you are, if you're just starting out or just learning about reading body language, you really want to go through this list and look at each of these things individually, so that you can form sort of an overall picture of what you're seeing. And then the really important thing too, in addition to observing what each of these body parts is doing, is you want to pay attention to how are they changing in response both to the environment and in response to your behavior, you as the human. So I'm thinking about, when I approach, how does that change their position in the kennel? Or if the dog next door barks, how does that change the position of their mouth? So those things will help inform both what you're seeing in the moment, but also could inform how their behavior might change in response to other things in the environment, which ultimately will help you create an overall picture of who this animal is and how we can best support them. So we'll go through each of these quickly. That when we're looking at their head, we're looking at their head position in relation to the rest of their body. So a natural carriage for a dog's head would be above their spine level, but in this one you can see that it's rather rigid. It's kind of sticking straight up and out towards the front of the dog's body, whereas this dog has his head sort of lowered below his spine level. This one is very deliberately turning away from the person who's presumably standing here taking a picture. And this one, again, has his head lower than his body. So when we're noticing sort of the position of the body, we want to be thinking about what is the context, what might this be in response to, and how does that fit into the overall picture. So another important thing to just point out when we're thinking about each piece of their body is that you can't ever really just look at one and make a judgment on that. It's really important that we're considering every part of the animal's body in addition to the context. So sometimes they're, like, for example, their head and their tail might be saying conflicting things. So if you looked at one, you might have one impression of the dog's, state or how you might interact with that dog. But if you look at the tail, then it might tell you something different. So it's really important. It is important to look at each individually, but also overall as the whole. So again, looking at their eyes, most people are probably familiar with this sort of what's called whale eye. You can see the whites of their eyes here. And in this particular case, it's paired with a closed mouth, a furrowed brow, his ears are down. There's tension in his face. So all of those might indicate that there's some amount of discomfort. And here again, furrowed brow, whale eye, mouth closed. In comparison here to this dog's eyes, who are nice and relaxed, they're very round. His ears are nice and relaxed. There doesn't appear to be any tension in his head or his mouth. And then we're thinking about context again. So here's two more examples of a dog who's has some whale eye, but if you look at this one here, it looks like he's just looking down at his toy. So while I can see the whites of his eyes, I might not make the same assumption that I would about this dog or this photo of the same dog who, again, I see the whites of his eyes, but other things about his head and his face, also indicate some amount of discomfort or stress. So I might make different conclusions about these two photos, even though their eyes look very similar. So looking at their mouths next, again, we'll start with nice and relaxed. So this dog has his mouth open. There doesn't appear to be any tension in his mouth or anywhere else on his face. And as we go down to the right, there is more and more tension. So I think this dachshund is a really good example of what could be a little bit more subtle. But if you look closely, it becomes more apparent that there is a lot of tension in this dog's face. So his mouth is closed, you can see. And then you can also see all of the tension. So there's this line of sort of a flexed muscle here along his jaw, and back further in the back of his jaw here. You can see that his mouth is closed, but also his top lip is sort of curled under. And you can tell that because there's this like tight line here where the black part of his lip looks like it's flipped under, and you can't see it on the top. And you can also to be poofed out a little bit. So all of that tells me that there's a lot of tension in this dog's face. This is definitely not a dog that I would be reaching for, and I would be cautious about how I might interact with him. And then these two here are a little bit more obvious, but I think still worth reviewing. The thing that stands out most to me, aside from the teeth that are showing, is that their lips are pulled forward, and same for the dachshund here too. So one thing that you'll notice when a dog is carrying a lot of tension in their mouth is that they'll pull their lips forward. So if this dog were in a neutral position, his lips might come all the way back to about here probably. But you can see that he's pulling them forward in addition to all of this tension, again, along his jaw and under his eyes here. And then again, the lips are sort of curled under. And he's presumably making some sort of vocalization. And then again, here, lips are pulled all the way forward. He's baring his teeth, which you can see also makes his nose sort of turn up here. There's some wrinkles on top of his nose. So those are some other more subtle things. If they're not paired with the teeth being bared, that could indicate to you that that's a dog that you might want to give some space to. And then again, where it's important to consider the context in each of these situations. So some examples of a mouth that might be that might look like a dog who's being aggressive if you weren't aware of the context is there's a lot of dogs who do like a submissive grin, and they'll show their teeth, but their whole body is wagging side to side and they're loose and floppy and silly, but they're showing you their teeth. And that is one thing that could be a little bit it would be easy to misinterpret if you weren't looking at the full picture. So tail, another good one that, again, this is one that comes up a lot when we're talking with members of the public about, either they're surrendering their pet to us and we're trying to get information about their behavior, or we're talking about adoption counseling. That, a common misconception is that a dog who's wagging their tail is happy. But for those of you who have been doing this for long enough, know that that's not always the case. That it's really important to look at how it's wagging and where it's wagging and in what context is it wagging. So this is a video that I'm going to have to switch sharing my screen, so I'll just describe it to you. He is wagging his tail along with his entire body. So he's nice and loose. It looks like one big noodle wagging back and forth. His tail's hitting the sides of his chest when he's wagging. His ears are nice and soft and back. That I think would be fair to say is a dog who's wagging because he is happy, not a lot of stress going on there, compared to this dog here, where you can see the photo, at least, this thing sticking tail. This is a real dog to the right, to the left is a fake dog, and the real dog comes into the room and runs up very quickly. His entire body is very tall and stiff, and his tail is sticking straight up and is motionless except for the very end of it, which is wagging in very fast, short motions. So a very different looking wag than the one on the left, but he is still wagging his tail. The assumption I would make about this one is not that he's happy. I would say that there's some amount of distress happening here. And this is a situation that I would certainly proceed with caution, compared to this one where it just looks like a normal, happy, relaxed dog. And then looking at a tucked tail, for some comparison here, you can see it's tucked. He's curving his entire body to make his tail tuck as far as it possibly can. And then again, looking at the context, it appears that he's in some sort of kennel space. He's confined. He has a person that is leaning over him. He has a person presumably here taking this photo without a lot of option to move away. All of that contributing to the nervous body language that we see here. And then again, the last sort of piece of the puzzle is the overall posture. So is the dog standing with his weight evenly distributed like this dog here? Is it shifted back with the head low? Which might mean that they're, trying to retreat a little bit, make themselves small, like Corinne described with that cats can do sometimes, or are they leaning away with their head up tall, lips puckered, pulled forward, all of that, which might be an indication that he's anticipating or getting ready to bark or growl or something like that. Is the weight shifted forward like it is in these two? This one has a low head compared to a high head, but they're both leaning forward with a lot of tension in their body. So how are we looking at the whole picture in addition to each individual? And then the last thing I'll say on body language for the dogs is that it's really important that we're looking at each dog as an individual. So we have these sort of general rules that apply to all animals within the species of what what a particular piece of body language might be telling us. But each individual animal has their own way of communicating and their own features that are unique to them. So it's really important that we're comparing within an individual as much as possible. So as we get to know them, we get to identify, what this particular dog does when he's saying that he's uncomfortable. And this is just a good example of lots of 4 pictures of the same dog, and he looks very different in each of them. And looking at the eyes and the ears and the mouth and how the wrinkles form around the mouth or on the forehead, the position of the ears, all of those things, as you get to know each individual animal will help inform what that animal needs in that moment to feel more comfortable. And we're not always afforded that luxury in our line of work. We don't always get to know them as well as we might if they were in our home, but that's where documenting your interactions with them and sharing information about your experience with the rest of your team is really valuable, because collectively we are spending a lot of time with them. And if we share that information, then we all are better armed to help each animal that we're helping. And then thinking about our body language. So again, some do's and don'ts that we'll go through for how to interact with dogs. In general, I would say the things that we want to keep in mind is that we should, when possible, be facing our shoulders away from the dog. So the opposite of what's happening here, we should be bending at the knees rather than the waist. So the opposite of what's happening here. And then we really want to avoid reaching for the dog whenever possible. So just like we talked about with cats, we want to do the same with dogs, or we're letting them approach as much as possible. Again, considering want versus need. Do I need to approach and sort of force this interaction if the animal is saying no, or is it something that we can take a break on and wait until he's feeling more comfortable to approach me on his own? And here I would say is like the biggest no of all is removing any opportunity for the dog to get away. So he has him on a taut leash, he's bending over, he's reaching over. All of these things are invading the dog's space when he's pretty clearly saying he's uncomfortable. And if you eliminate every option for the dog to move away when they're being very clear that they're uncomfortable, the very likely next step is going to be for them to use their teeth to say that they're uncomfortable. So in general, all of these animals that we're discussing will use these more subtle signs. They'll tuck their ears, or they'll pin their ears, tuck their tail, shift their body weight away. Those are all really polite and subtle ways of saying no, thank you, I am not interested in interacting. And if those are continuously ignored, pressure is continued to be put on, that's when we teach dogs or cats to start to be more forward. So they're a little bit louder about saying no, thank you. And if that's still ignored, then they start to use their teeth. They're snapping, biting, coming forward to say, I said no, thank you, and I don't think you heard me, so let me say it a little bit louder. So it's really important to really assess, is it really necessary for us to keep going? Because not only do we risk an unsafe interaction in that moment, we also risk teaching that animal that is the way that they need to behave in order to get their point across, which just means that they're more likely to do it again in the future if they're in a situation where they're feeling uncomfortable. So some better ways to interact would be to turn your shoulders away, bending at the waist, keeping your hands to yourself. She's offering a treat here, but you can see the other examples, their hands are to themselves. And really, instead of offering a treat this way, what I would probably recommend instead would be to toss it away so that they're able to get the treat and also get some distance from you. And then they have the opportunity to decide whether or not they want to approach again. So I'm going to go through as quickly as I can. Restraint, low stress restraint when it comes to dogs. Just like Corinne mentioned, for cats, we really want to take a less is more approach as much as possible. Of course, we want to consider safety for us and for the animal. But outside of that, we really want to try to use as little restraint as possible. We want to be really in clear communication with our teammate. We want to be thinking about the environment. So do I want to do it in this space where there's other dogs barking, or would I rather go to a room where I can close the door and have a little bit more quiet and a little more control over the environment? What is the surface that we're using? So is it a big dog? Are we doing it on the ground, or do I need to lift them onto the table? How can I do that safely? Do I have a non-slip mat? Do I need a comforter? What is the surface that's going to be most comfortable for the dog? Consider what we know about the animal. So even if this animal just came in and was a stray, we still have information about what was their behavior when the person who brought them into us retrieved them. Did they have to catch the animal? Was the animal moving away? Did it come up to them willingly? Did it jump in their car? What did they look like when they walked into the lobby? Did they pass a dog on their way in? Did they interact with a stranger? All of that is really valuable information. Whether or not we have a full history on an animal, we still have the information that is available to us. We just have to know what to ask for. So it's really important to gather as much of that information as possible, because it will inform how you interact with that animal in those first couple of hours and days that they're with you. You want to consider all of the strategies that you've learned and your collective experience. So leaning on your more experienced coworkers, learning from each other. And thinking about, does this animal have a friend? Is there a space in the building where this animal is particularly comfortable? So I know this cat has been hanging out in an office. So rather than remove them from that comfortable space to go to an exam room, I'm just going to bring the stuff into the office and do whatever I need to do in there. Or I know that this animal has had a lot of success with one particular staff person. So I'm going to wait until that person is available so that we can do this exam together. So first of all, we want to think about safely maneuvering the dog to whatever surface we need to get them on. So supporting their neck, supporting their body, just like we talked about with cats. And whenever possible, we want them to be like dangling at the least amount as possible. So if we don't need to be lifting a giant dog, then let's just do the exam on the ground. If we do need to lift them, how can we make sure we're supporting their hips and their head? How can we use a leash to sort of stabilize the neck if we're a little bit worried about head whipping or snapping during the process? And we'll also talk about using towels and blankets. When we are actually restraining for a blood draw or a vaccine or whatever procedure we need to do, again, less is more. It's ideal circumstances when the animal will eat. If the animal is eating, my preference is something that they can lick. Or something that they can chew. So I'll do like cream cheese or peanut butter or Cheese Whiz on some sort of mat, or lining the bottom of a bowl or something like that, where they can continuously lick, and that sort of increase of that snack, rather than just giving them like a piece of cheese that they swallow and then it's done. Or something, and if you don't have something that they can lick, then something that's really crunchy that will take them longer to work on would be my second choice. But just thinking about how to, and this is what I mean too when I say there's not like a one size fits all. It's so dependent on the dog's behavior in that moment, dependent on the space that you have, dependent on the skill set of the people that that are doing the procedure. All of those things make it change maybe how you're going to approach. But the idea, if possible, is to have the animal distracted with a snack, have a physical barrier. So in this case, this person's legs is acting as the barrier while this person draws blood. So if the dog is going to whip to see what's happening, they're going to whip into her legs. And over here is the wall. So if they whip that way, they'll go into the wall. So there's a little bit of protection for her face. And then if you need more restraint, or sometimes the animal isn't eating, like in this example here. So similar to the cat with the sort of baseball mitt, grip on the head. She is in position to restrain, but she's not doing it yet. If the dog is squirming or becomes fractious and she really is has identified this as a need and is going to restrain more firmly, then this hand can just slide up and have a little bit more firm pressure on the dog's neck. And again, it just goes up in sort of amount of pressure. And I'll just mention on this one here, this is a dog who's wearing a muzzle, which is a really wonderful tool for a dog who's less comfortable being restrained. So your options when you have a really big dog who you don't totally trust are either restrain enough that they're not able to move and bite you, which can be really difficult if they're not comfortable with you getting that close, or they're really big and strong. And even if you can give them your best restraint, you're not going to be able to keep them still because they're just so powerful. A muzzle is an excellent option there that you don't have to restrain, because even if they attempt to bite, they won't be able to because they're muzzled. So that gives you a little bit more freedom to not to use less restraint, to be less concerned about the risk of a bite, which sort of just alleviates a little bit of tension for everybody. And then the dog can just stand there comfortably without having somebody holding on to them. Oops. That's a video that I'm going to skip because we're running low on time. And so again, we want to think about the whole process. So where are we doing this? If we're bringing a dog in for intake, are we going to a quiet room? Are we doing it in the lobby? Thinking about what kennel we're going to put them in. Is there a neighbor door and this is a scared dog? Maybe I could find a quieter place for them. You want to make sure you have a plan before you begin the interaction, so you have all of the equipment you need before you actually have the dog in front of you. Thinking about how to reduce stress while you're putting on walking equipment, while you're choosing the kennel, like I mentioned, just walking through the building. So having the dog at your side instead of walking all the way ahead of you, turning the corner and running into another dog that you didn't even know was there. All of these things that we do, we should be thinking through the lens of how can I reduce stress, prevent anything bad from happening to the best of my ability. And then how can I communicate both with the animal and with my teammates about how that interaction went. Walking through the building, if you have the ability to implement any sort of training plan or behavior modification, my very strong recommendation would be to use positive reinforcement as the tool. You can use equipment that makes handling a little bit easier for dogs who are really strong or powerful, like a front clip harness or a head halter. Again, when you're in the building, keeping the leash nice and short. But then once you get outside, giving them a little bit more freedom to sniff and do dog things. And then again, knowing when to stop, assessing a want versus a need, waiting for surgery if that is an option for this dog. Rather than figuring out how to restrain for a blood draw, we can just do it when he's sleeping for his neuter. Recruiting people who have a good relationship with that animal already, or who are very well versed in low stress handling techniques. Giving the dog some more time to settle in, choosing a different space, using chemical restraint, all of these are good options. And then just like cats, we're observing their body language throughout the interactions, and not just at the beginning, not just after, but throughout the entire thing. We're allowing the dog to come to us. We're avoiding over arousal. So similar to cats, again, we're not playing games that are really, really exciting. We're not intentionally getting a dog all jacked up. Instead, we're focusing on teaching calm behavior. Exercise is very, very important, but it is not the only thing that is important to dogs while they're with us. We also really want to help them learn how to settle, because that is an invaluable tool once they go into their adoptive home. And then utilizing different spaces. So some other options that we can do when we're thinking about the whole picture of reducing stress for animals in our care, lots of enrichment opportunities. So there's the store-bought puzzle feeders. You can also use things to make, just with random things lying around, like a muffin tin with tennis balls. Office time is so underrated. Just giving the dog an opportunity to relax out of their kennel. They don't have to be doing anything really fun and exciting. Sometimes just taking a snooze with their friend in the room is really beneficial. Utilizing the property around your adoption center. So in Methuen, we happen to have this river that dogs sometimes swim in and get stuck and have to be saved from. We have a nice walking trail dog yards at all of our adoption centers where they can play with each other if that's appropriate. Frozen kennel or frozen Kongs, and any sort of enrichment item is really beneficial. So summary that we have the power to do all of these things. It's up to us to create the experience for the animals in our care, and we have to be committed to doing it as a team. We want to be committed to setting up a safe environment, making things a little bit easier for the animals while they're with us, and ultimately improving the well-being for everybody involved. It's exactly 11, so I assume we probably don't have time for questions, but hopefully our contact information is included. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
This is a really informative session. I know I had a lot of my staff watching, so we really appreciate your doing this for us today.
Thank you.
We did have one question in the Q&A section that I think we can get to real quick. Someone asked, what is a chemical restraint? Could you explain that a little bit?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. It is any sort of drug that reduces the, like a sedative or an anti-anxiety medication. It requires that you have a vet on staff or a volunteer vet to be able to prescribe that. But we use things like trazodone, gabapentin, things like that before an exam or before something stressful when it's indicated. And that can just help make things a little bit, take the edge off a little bit for the animal and make handling them a little bit easier.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So just a reminder to everyone that you can access our trainings on our YouTube site through our website. This will be posted by the end of this week. And this training will be posted, and check out our website for more details on our other webinars coming up, as well as our annual conference that will be happening in the spring. We're really excited to bring that back and be in person. So thank you all, and we hope to see you at the next one.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.